In the shadowed corridors of power, where whispers of alliance could reshape empires, a young nation forged in fire sought unlikely friends across forbidden borders. Before the storm of revolution swept through Tehran, Israel's Mossad wove a web of secrets deep into the heart of Iran, a network built on fragile trust, high-stakes gambles, and the unyielding drive for survival. This is the untold story of how spies, statesmen, and shadows intertwined, long before the world watched an empire crumble. March 4, 1950. Tel Aviv, Israel. David Ben-Gurion, the grizzled founding father of the Jewish state, sat hunched over his desk in the modest government offices, the weight of a newborn nation's fragility pressing on his shoulders like the desert sun. At 63, with his wild shock of white hair and piercing eyes that had seen the horrors of pogroms and the miracle of independence, Ben-Gurion was no stranger to isolation. Israel, just 2 years old, stood encircled by Arab armies, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, all vowing to drive the Jews into the sea. The ink on the armistice agreements from the 1948 War of Independence was barely dry, and already the Cold War's chill winds blew across the Middle East, with Soviet arms flowing to Israel's foes. A telegram arrived that morning, its crisp paper crackling in Ben-Gurion's hands. From Tehran, Iran, the ancient Persian Empire reborn under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, had extended de facto recognition to Israel. It was not full diplomatic embrace. Iran, mindful of its Muslim neighbors, kept it quiet, but it was a lifeline. Ben-Gurion leaned back, a rare smile creasing his face. The periphery, he murmured to himself, a term that would become doctrine. In that moment, personal triumph mingled with profound relief. This was not just politics, but the survival of a people who had endured exile for millennia. The Shah's gesture echoed the biblical Cyrus the Great, who had freed the Jews from Babylonian captivity in 539 BCE. History, it seemed, was rhyming, but Ben-Gurion knew the emotional stakes. One wrong move, and Israel could vanish. Globally, the world teetered on the brink. The Korean War loomed, superpowers vied for influence, and oil-rich Iran stood as a bulwark against Soviet expansion. This quiet nod from Tehran could open doors to alliances beyond the Arab ring of hostility, but it demanded discretion, daring, and spies. The seeds of Mossad's network in Iran were planted in those early days of uncertainty. Ben-Gurion, ever the strategist, envisioned the Periphery Doctrine, forging bonds with non-Arab states like Iran, Turkey, and Ethiopia to counter the pan-Arab nationalism spearheaded by Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. Iran, under the Shah, shared Israel's fears. Both nations eyed the Soviet bear to the north and radical Arab regimes to the west. The Shah, reinstated after a 1953 coup backed by the CIA and British intelligence, known as Operation Ajax, was modernizing his country at breakneck speed, but he needed friends to secure his throne. Israel offered expertise in agriculture, technology, and, crucially, intelligence. By 1955, tentative contacts evolved into something more concrete. Mossad, Israel's nascent intelligence agency founded in 1949 under Reuven, began dispatching operatives to Tehran. Shiloh, a soft-spoken Baghdad-born diplomat with a knack for building bridges, personally oversaw the initial outreach. In secretive meetings in neutral European cities like Zurich, Israeli envoys met Iranian counterparts, exchanging whispers about shared threats. The human cost was immediate. Agents risked their lives crossing borders, assuming false identities, and navigating Tehran's labyrinthine bazaars where a single slip could mean execution. One early operative, a young Mossad recruit named Yaakov Nimrodi, arrived in Tehran in 1956 under the guise of a businessman. Nimrodi, an Iraqi Jew who had fled to Israel in 1949, spoke fluent Persian and Arabic. His personal stake was visceral. Family members left behind in the Muslim world faced persecution, and he saw Iran as a gateway to rescue operations. Nimrodi's nights were spent cultivating contacts in the Iranian military, his days blending into the crowd, always aware that betrayal lurked in every shadow. The turning point came in 1957, when the Shah established SAVAK, Iran's feared secret police and intelligence service. On March 15, 1957, in a palace ceremony in Tehran, General Temur Bakhtiar was appointed SAVAK's first director. What the world didn't know was the invisible hand of Mossad. With U.S. CIA officers pulling back amid tensions, Israeli trainers stepped in. Isser Harel, Mossad's iron-fisted chief from 1952 to 1963, authorized the dispatch of experts to Tehran. They taught SAVAK interrogation techniques, surveillance methods, and counter-espionage, skills honed in Israel's own fight for existence. In exchange, SAVAK shared intelligence on Arab militants and Soviet agents infiltrating the region. The emotional undercurrent was raw. For Israeli operatives, training Iranians meant arming potential future enemies, but the immediate payoff was survival. One anonymous Mossad veteran later recalled the tension. "We were building a monster, but it was our monster against Nasser's hordes." By July 1958, the alliance crystallized with the formation of Trident, a trilateral intelligence pact between Israel, Iran, and Turkey. Signed in Ankara on July 28, 1958, amid the chaos of the Iraqi monarchy's overthrow, Trident formalized what had been informal. Mossad's station in Tehran grew from a handful of operatives to a full-fledged hub. Reuven Merhav, who would later become Mossad's station chief in Iran, described the era as one of mutual necessity. Agents like Nimrodi embedded deeply. He rose to become Israel's military attaché in Tehran by 1965, facilitating arms deals and joint operations. In one daring move in 1960, Mossad used Iranian soil as a staging ground for Operation Diamond, luring an Iraqi MiG-21 pilot to defect to Israel via Kurdistan, a coup that gave the West its first look at Soviet fighter tech. The pilot, Munir Redfa, landed in Israel on August 16, 1966, after months of planning involving Iranian safe houses. The tension was palpable. Redfa's family was smuggled out through Iran, their escape a heartbeat away from disaster. Lives hung in the balance. Defectors faced death squads, agents risked exposure. As the 1960s unfolded, the network deepened amid global upheavals. The Six-Day War of June 1967 tested the bonds. On June 5, as Israeli jets struck Egyptian airfields, the Shah quietly supplied oil to Israel, bypassing the Arab embargo. Iranian tankers docked at Eilat, offloading precious crude through a joint pipeline built in 1968. Economically, ties boomed. Israeli companies like Solel Boneh constructed dams and housing in Iran, while Iranian students studied in Haifa. But beneath the commerce lay the shadows. Mossad and SAVAK conducted joint ops against common foes: Palestinian Fedayeen, Kurdish rebels. Ironically, Israel supported Iraqi Kurds against Baghdad, with Iranian facilitation. In 1968, Mossad helped SAVAK thwart a plot by Egyptian agents to assassinate the Shah during a visit to Isfahan on April 10th. The bust saved lives but exacted a toll. Interrogations were brutal, reminders of the human cost in this game of thrones. Ben-Gurion's vision bore fruit, but not without peril. Operatives lived double lives, families back home worried in silence. Nimrodi, by now a colonel, navigated Tehran's elite circles, dining with generals while funneling intelligence to Tel Aviv. The emotional stakes escalated with each success. An intercepted Soviet arms shipment in 1969, shared via Trident, prevented escalation in the war of attrition. Yet cracks appeared. Iranian clerics like Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled in Najaf since 1964, railed against the Shah's Zionist ties in fiery tapes smuggled into Iran. On November 15, 1965, Khomeini denounced Israel as an enemy of Islam, sowing seeds of dissent. Mossad monitored him but dismissed the threat, a miscalculation that would haunt them. By the early 1970s, the network was a well-oiled machine. Meir Ezri, Israel's ambassador to Iran from 1958 to 1973, a Persian Jew himself, bridged cultural gaps. In Tehran on December 7, 1961, Ben-Gurion met the Shah in a historic summit, toasting to eternal friendship. Military sales surged. Israel sold Uzi submachine guns and Sultan mortars to Iran, while joint ventures like Project Flower in 1977 aimed to develop advanced missiles. But the human element remained fraught. Agents faced isolation, the constant fear of compromise. One operation in 1972 involved infiltrating a Soviet spy ring in Mossad. Success came at the price of an Iranian informant's life, executed by hanging on May 19th. The consequences weighed heavy, families torn, consciences scarred. As oil crises gripped the world in 1973, Iran's wealth-fueled ambitions but internal unrest simmered. Mossad's reports noted growing protests, but faith in the Shah blinded them to the gathering storm. The network, built on personal bonds and shared secrets, seemed unbreakable. Yet, in the opulent halls of Niavaran Palace, the Shah pondered his legacy, unaware that the very alliances sustaining him were fanning flames of revolution. Tehran, October 1973. The city pulsed with the rhythm of autumn, the scent of saffron and charcoal smoke drifting through the narrow alleys of the Grand Bazaar. In a discreet villa on the northern slopes of the Alborz Mountains, overlooking the sprawling capital, a small group of men gathered under the cover of night. Among them was Reuven Merhav, Mossad's rising star in Iran, a soft-spoken veteran whose calm demeanor masked the steel of a survivor. Merhav had spent years building the Tehran station, turning it into one of Mossad's most valuable outposts. Tonight, the stakes felt heavier than ever. The Yom Kippur War had erupted just days earlier, on October 6th, when Egyptian and Syrian forces launched a surprise assault across the Suez Canal and Golan Heights. Israel's survival hung in the balance. Again. In the villa's dimly lit study, Merhav met with high-ranking SAVAK officers, men he had trained alongside, shared secrets with, and trusted as much as one could in this shadowed world. The Shah had already made his quiet decision. Iran would not join the Arab oil embargo against the West, and crucially, against Israel. Iranian tankers continued to sail to Eilat, pumping lifeblood oil through the Trans-Israel pipeline completed in 1968. But more than oil was at stake. Merhav needed assurances, real-time intelligence on Soviet resupplies to Egypt and Syria, anything to give Israel's battered forces an edge. The meeting was tense. One SAVAK general, a man Merhav knew only as the colonel, leaned forward, his voice low. "We share what we can, but remember, our king walks a tightrope. The Arabs watch us." Merhav nodded, understanding the emotional calculus. The Shah feared isolation as much as Israel did. In that exchange, the human cost was palpable. Men bound by necessity, knowing betrayal could come from any direction. Merhav left with fragments of SIGINT intercepts, showing Soviet Il-76 transports landing in Damascus. Back at the safe house, he relayed the details to Tel Aviv. Those scraps helped Israeli pilots anticipate enemy movements, saving lives in the desperate air battles over the Sinai. The war's end in late October brought no relief, only deeper entrenchment. Mossad's network in Iran expanded rapidly in the mid-1970s, fueled by booming oil wealth and the Shah's ambition to make Iran a regional superpower. Arms deals flourished. Israel became one of Iran's largest suppliers, selling everything from Gabriel anti-ship missiles to advanced electronics. In 1975, a massive contract saw Israel deliver hundreds of Shafrir air-to-air missiles and upgrade Iranian F-4 Phantom jets with Israeli avionics. Yaakov Nimrodi, the legendary operative who had laid the foundation, now operated as a semi-official arms broker. By then, in his late 40s, Nimrodi moved through Tehran's elite circles with ease, dining at the Niavaran Palace, negotiating with generals over cognac. His personal drive was unrelenting. Family stories of persecution in Iraq fueled his commitment to secure Israel's position. Yet the irony gnawed at him, arming a Muslim monarchy while Arab states plotted Israel's destruction. Joint operations intensified. In the rugged mountains of northern Iraq, Mossad and SAVAK ran parallel support for Kurdish Peshmerga fighters under Mustafa Barzani. Since the late 1960s, Israel had funneled weapons, money, and trainers to the Kurds to bleed Saddam Hussein's regime in Baghdad, a mutual enemy. Iranian border posts served as conduits. SAVAK provided cover and logistics. One night in 1974, near the town of Haj Omran, a Mossad team crossed into Iraq with Iranian escorts to deliver mortars and radios. The operation succeeded, but not without loss. A young Kurdish guide was killed in a Ba'athist ambush. The incident haunted the agents, reminders that every success carried blood. By 1975, the alliance hit a subtle but significant snag. On March 6, 1975, in Algiers, the Shah signed an accord with Saddam Hussein, ending Iranian support for the Kurds in exchange for border concessions and navigational rights in the Shatt al-Arab waterway. The Kurds were abandoned overnight. Barzani's forces collapsed. Thousands fled or were massacred. For Mossad, it was a bitter betrayal. Merhav and his team watched helplessly as their Kurdish allies were left exposed. The emotional toll was profound. Agents who had lived among the Peshmerga, shared their meals and dangers, felt the sting of abandonment. Uri Lubrani, Israel's ambassador to Iran from 1973, later described the moment as a cold shower. The Shah's pragmatism clashed with Israel's moral commitments, exposing the fragility beneath the partnership. Yet the network endured, even strengthened in some ways. The Shah, wary of Arab encirclement, doubled down on Israeli ties. In 1977, Project Flower, a joint venture to develop advanced surface-to-surface missiles, took shape in secret facilities near Isfahan. Israeli engineers worked alongside Iranian counterparts, sharing blueprints and test data. Mossad's Tehran station, now housed in a fortified compound disguised as a commercial office, hummed with activity. Agents like Nachik Navot, who headed the branch from 1969 to 1972 before rotating back, had built layers of cover. Businesses, cultural exchanges, even marriages into local families. Human sources proliferated, disgruntled officers, merchants, technicians, feeding a steady stream of intelligence on Arab movements and Soviet penetration. The human element remained the core. Take the case of an Iranian Jewish businessman in Tehran, codenamed the Merchant. Recruited in the early 1970s, he provided access to military procurement circles. His motivation was personal, fear for his community's future amid rising Islamist whispers. In 1976, he passed documents revealing Egyptian attempts to acquire advanced radar from Soviet bloc states, information that helped Israel prepare countermeasures. But the risk was constant. SAVAK monitored everyone. One wrong word could unravel years of work. The Merchant lived in quiet terror, his family unaware of the double life. As the decade wore on, cracks widened. Protests erupted sporadically. Students in 1977 chanting against the Shah's westernization, clerics in Qom denouncing Zionist influence. Mossad analysts filed reports. Khomeini's tapes from Najaf grew bolder, calling Israel the Little Satan. Yet optimism prevailed in Tehran station. The Shah seemed secure, his army modern, his coffers overflowing. Operatives believed the network could weather storms. In late 1978, the air changed. Strikes paralyzed the oil fields. Demonstrations swelled in Tehran. On September 8, 1978, Black Friday, security forces opened fire on protesters in Jaleh Square, killing dozens. The Shah declared martial law, but the tide turned. Mossad agents reported growing defections in the military, whispers of sympathy for Khomeini among mid-level officers. Merhav, now a senior figure, sensed the unraveling. In a encrypted cable to headquarters, he warned, "The foundation trembles. We must prepare contingencies." The network that had taken decades to build faced its greatest test, not from external enemies, but from the revolution brewing within. Agents began quietly destroying sensitive files, burning contacts, readying escape routes. The emotional weight pressed hard. Friends in SAVAK faced uncertain fates. Jewish Iranians grew anxious. The Shah's once unshakable grip slipped, and with it, the illusion of permanence. Tehran, January 16, 1979. The Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi boarded a Boeing 707 at Merhav airport under the gray winter sky, his face gaunt from illness and defeat. He carried a small box of Iranian soil, a symbolic gesture of return that few believed would ever come. As the plane lifted off toward Egypt, the man who had ruled for 37 years left behind a nation in chaos. Strikes choking the oil fields, soldiers deserting barracks, and millions pouring into streets chanting for the return of Ayatollah Khomeini. In the shadows of the airport perimeter, a Mossad operative watched the departure through binoculars, heart heavy with the realization that decades of careful cultivation were unraveling in real time. Reuven Merhav, Mossad's station chief in Tehran until his rotation out the previous summer, had been one of the first to sound the alarm. In March 1978, he and Ambassador Uri Lubrani had flown secretly to Kish Island in the Persian Gulf for a clandestine meeting with Israeli officials. There, over tense hours in a guarded villa, Merhav laid out the grim assessment. The Shah's modernization drive had alienated the clergy. His secret police SAVAK had bred resentment instead of loyalty, and economic mismanagement fueled by oil boom had created a powder keg. The regime is slipping, Merhav had warned, his voice steady but edged with urgency. We may have months, not years. The warning reached Tel Aviv, but optimism lingered. Many in Mossad's upper echelons still saw the Shah as indispensable, a bulwark against radicalism. Now, with the Shah gone, the network faced existential choices. The Tehran station, once a bustling hub of joint operations, arms coordination, and intelligence sharing, became a ghost operation. Agents moved with extreme caution, avoiding known meeting points, burning documents in small batches to avoid smoke drawing attention. The emotional stakes were excruciating. Iranian contacts, SAVAK officers, military liaisons, Jewish businessmen, who had risked everything for the alliance now faced retribution. Some begged for extraction, others went silent, fearing phone lines were tapped by the rising revolutionary committees. In the days following the Shah's flight, Shapur Bakhtiar, the last prime minister appointed by the monarch, made a desperate plea. On January 17th, as Khomeini prepared to return from Paris, Bakhtiar reached out through back channels to Mossad representatives still in Tehran. His request was stark: assassinate Khomeini before he could consolidate power. The Ayatollah's plane was due to land in Tehran on February 1st. His fiery rhetoric had already ignited the streets. Mossad weighed the option. Killing the cleric could potentially stabilize the moderate government, but the risks were astronomical. Exposure would doom remaining agents and burn bridges with whatever regime emerged. Headquarters in Tel Aviv rejected the plan. It was too late, too uncertain. The decision left operatives with a bitter taste. They had built an empire of influence, only to watch it collapse without a final gambit. February 1st, 1979. Merhav Airport again became the epicenter. Hundreds of thousands lined the streets as Khomeini's Air France Boeing 747 touched down. Mossad assets reported the scene. Jubilant crowds, armed militiamen, the old order dissolving in euphoria. In the chaos, agents focused on survival and salvage. Priority 1: extract sensitive materials and key human sources. Jewish Iranians, numbering around 80,000, grew fearful. Khomeini's early statements were ambiguous toward the community, but revolutionary fervor often turned ugly. Mossad activated escape routes honed over years, forged passports, bribes at border crossings, overland treks through Turkey or Pakistan. One operation stood out for its quiet heroism. In mid-February, as Revolutionary Guard seized SAVAK headquarters and began summary executions, a Mossad team exfiltrated a high-value asset, a former SAVAK liaison who had shared intelligence on Palestinian groups for over a decade. The man, in his 50s, had family in Tehran. Leaving meant abandoning everything. Under cover of night, they moved him to a safe house in northern Tehran, then smuggled him out via truck to the Turkish border near Bazargan. The crossing was tense. Guards loyal to the new regime patrolled aggressively, but a prearranged bribe and false papers got him through. In Israel, he arrived broken but alive, carrying fragments of files that detailed joint Mossad SAVAK ops against Arab militants in the 1970s. His debriefing revealed the depth of betrayal felt. "We trusted you to stand with us. Now we're ghosts." The broader extraction effort accelerated. Throughout 1979 and into 1980, Mossad facilitated the departure of thousands of Iranian Jews. Routes varied. Some flew out on commercial flights with altered documents before airports tightened. Others crossed into Pakistan, then to India or Europe. One family of 5, connected to an early Mossad recruit, was hidden in a Tehrani basement for weeks while agents arranged passage. The father, a merchant who had passed economic intelligence on Soviet dealings, wept as he boarded a flight to Istanbul. Relief mixed with grief for the life left behind. The human cost mounted. Those who stayed faced suspicion, property seizures, or worse. Mossad lost contact with several sources. Rumors of executions filtered back, each one a personal wound. Amid the exodus, remnants of the network attempted to maintain minimal presence. A few deep-cover agents went dormant, blending into society under new identities. They monitored the new regime's consolidation, the fall of Bakhtiar's government on February 11th, the establishment of the Islamic Republic on April 1st after a referendum. Khomeini's inner circle purged pro-Shah elements. SAVAK was dismantled, its archives looted or burned. What survived fell into revolutionary hands. Documents detailing Israeli training programs, joint Trident ops, arms deals. The exposure was devastating. Names surfaced in show trials, endangering anyone linked. By late 1979, the U.S. Embassy hostage crisis erupted on November 4th, when students seized the compound, holding 52 Americans for 444 days. Mossad watched from afar, using remaining assets to gauge the new regime's stability. Intelligence trickled in. Purges in the military, the rise of the Revolutionary Guard, anti-Israel rhetoric hardening into policy. The Periphery Doctrine that Ben-Gurion had envisioned, alliances with non-Arab states, shattered. Iran, once a quiet partner, became the epicenter of hostility. For the agents who had lived in Tehran for years, the revolution was personal. Families separated, friendships severed, years of trust evaporated. One veteran later reflected, "We built something real, shared meals, shared risks, then it vanished overnight." The network's collapse marked the end of an era, but not the end of Mossad's interest in Iran. Seeds of future operations were sown in those frantic months. Lessons in penetration, extraction, and the fragility of alliances. As the Islamic Republic rose, the shadows that once cooperated now turned adversarial, setting the stage for a new, colder war. Tel Aviv, spring 1980. The fluorescent lights in the Mossad headquarters basement hummed steadily, a constant reminder of the long nights ahead. In a windowless room lined with maps of the Middle East, a small team pored over fresh intelligence scraps from what had once been their most reliable outpost. The Islamic Republic of Iran was now 8 months old, its revolutionary fervor hardening into state policy. Ayatollah Khomeini's face adorned every billboard in Tehran, and his Friday sermons from Tehran University broadcast venom toward Israel, the cancerous tumor, to millions. The old network was ashes, but from those ashes, something new and far more dangerous was rising. The first priority after the Shah's fall had been containment. Prevent the leakage of sensitive knowledge. In the frantic weeks of early 1979, Mossad had managed to spirit out fragments of Trident files, training manuals, and lists of joint operations, but much remained behind. SAVAK archives captured during the February takeover, technical blueprints from Project Flower, even personnel dossiers on Israeli trainers who had worked in Iran. Revolutionary tribunals began public trials in spring 1979, parading former SAVAK officers and alleged Zionist collaborators. Names surfaced: Israeli military advisors, embassy staff, even low-level contacts. Some were executed by firing squad in Evin prison. Others vanished into the new intelligence apparatus being built under the Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. One name haunted the Tel Aviv analysts, General Manucher Hashemi, a senior SAVAK officer who had liaised closely with Mossad for over a decade. Captured in March 1979, he was tried in a revolutionary court on charges of cooperating with the Zionist entity. Hashemi's televised confession, coerced under torture, detailed joint surveillance ops against Palestinian groups in the 1970s, the transfer of interrogation techniques, and even the 1966 MiG-21 defection, staged through Iranian territory. The broadcast reached Israeli living rooms via foreign networks, a public humiliation. Mossad could only watch as a man who had once risked his life sharing secrets now became a propaganda tool. The emotional reverberation was deep. Loyalty had been repaid with exposure and death. Hashemi was executed on June 7, 1979, one of dozens whose fates weighed on the operatives who had once called them partners. By mid-1980, the new Iranian regime began exporting its revolution. The IRGC formed the Quds Force, a unit dedicated to supporting Shia militias abroad. Hezbollah emerged in Lebanon in 1982, but its roots stretched back to 1979 training camps near Qom and Tehran, where Palestinian and Lebanese fighters received instruction from IRGC veterans, some of whom had once been SAVAK trainees under Israeli guidance. The irony was bitter. Techniques taught in the 1960s and 1970s now turned against Israel. Mossad analysts traced the lineage, interrogation methods refined in joint sessions, surveillance tradecraft shared in Tehran safehouses, now deployed in Beirut bombings and kidnappings. The agency shifted posture. No longer partners, Iran became priority target number one. In late 1980, Mossad established a dedicated Iran desk, pulling veterans who had served in Tehran to lead it. Reuven Merhav, back from field rotations, became a key voice. His knowledge of Iranian society, military structure, and elite networks proved invaluable. He helped rebuild human intelligence from scratch, slow, painstaking, high risk. Initial efforts focused on Iranian exiles, former SAVAK officers who had fled to Europe or the United States, disillusioned military pilots, Jewish émigrés now in Los Angeles or Herzliya. Each debrief yielded fragments. Organizational charts of the new Ministry of Intelligence, SAVAK, names of rising IRGC commanders, locations of missile development sites inherited from Project Flower. One early success came through an unlikely channel. In 1981, a mid-level Iranian diplomat defected in Bonn, West Germany. He carried a briefcase of documents detailing early nuclear research, civilian at first, but with dual-use implications. Mossad debriefed him for weeks. His information confirmed suspicions that the Shah's ambitious nuclear program, once supported by Western allies including Israel, was being repurposed under clerical rule. The defector's motivation was personal: fear for his family, disgust at the regime's brutality. His escape had been narrow. IRGC agents nearly intercepted him at the airport. The intelligence he provided became foundational for Israel's long-term monitoring of Iran's nuclear ambitions. Meanwhile, the Iran-Iraq War, which erupted on September 22, 1980, created unexpected opportunities and moral dilemmas. Saddam Hussein's invasion aimed to exploit post-revolutionary chaos. Khomeini responded with human wave assaults and revolutionary zeal. Mossad watched closely. A quiet decision was made at the highest levels: provide limited indirect support to Iraq, not out of friendship, but to bleed Iran. Through third-party channels, often European arms brokers, Israel funneled spare parts for Iraq's Mirage jets and intelligence on Iranian troop movements. The operation, kept ultra-secret, echoed the old periphery logic: the enemy of my enemy. Yet the human cost was staggering. Agents knew their intelligence contributed to battlefield slaughter, hundreds of thousands dead on both sides by war's end in 1988. For veterans of the Tehran days, it felt like betrayal squared. First abandoning Kurdish allies in 1975, now indirectly aiding the regime that had crushed them. By the mid-1980s, Mossad's penetration deepened. Deep cover operatives entered Iran via commercial routes, businessmen from Turkey, European passports, even returning Iranian exiles with family ties. One such agent, a Persian-speaking Israeli of Iranian Jewish descent, established himself as a carpet trader in Tehran's bazaar in 1984. His cover was flawless. His real mission was to map the emerging nuclear infrastructure and cultivate sources inside state industries. The tension was constant: Revolutionary Guard checkpoints, neighborhood comité vigilance, the ever-present risk of denunciation. He lived alone, rarely sleeping soundly. Every conversation weighed for hidden meanings. His reports, smuggled out via couriers, confirmed that Bushehr and other sites were being revived with foreign assistance, first from Pakistan, later North Korea and China. The 1980s also saw the rise of proxy warfare. The 1983 Beirut barracks bombings, 241 American and 58 French dead, were traced to Hezbollah operatives trained and funded by Iran, SIRGC. Mossad responded with targeted operations, assassinations of key figures linked to attacks on Israeli interests. In 1988, the killing of Khalil al-Wazir, Abu Jihad in Tunis was a direct message, though not Iran-specific. Yet the shadow war with Tehran escalated quietly. Letter bombs, sabotaged equipment shipments, recruitment of disillusioned insiders. For the men and women rebuilding the network, the emotional landscape had shifted from alliance to attrition. Memories of Tehran dinners, shared risks, and mutual respect gave way to cold calculation. Former friends were now adversaries. The same streets once walked openly now required disguise and deception. One operative, reflecting years later, said simply, "We lost a partner. We gained an obsession." As the decade closed, Iran's nuclear program accelerated under covert cover. Mossad's sources inside the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran began feeding alarming details: centrifuge designs, uranium enrichment experiments. The revolution that had destroyed the old network had birthed a new threat, one that would demand decades of vigilance, ingenuity, and sacrifice. Tehran, February 12, 2010. Deep beneath the nondescript office buildings of the Iranian capital's northeastern district, centrifuges spun in cascades of silent fury. At Natanz, the once secret enrichment facility, now partially revealed to the world, housed thousands of IR-1 machines, each whirring at supersonic speeds, feeding uranium hexafluoride gas into ever higher concentrations of U-235. Iranian scientists, many trained in the West during the Shah's era, worked under the watchful eyes of Revolutionary Guard overseers. What they did not know was that for months, an invisible intruder had been living inside their control systems. In a windowless operations room at Mossad headquarters in Glylo, north of Tel Aviv, a team of cyber specialists and engineers monitored glowing screens. The operation, known internally as Olympic Games, had been years in the making. A joint effort with American partners from the NSA and CIA, but the Israeli component carried the heaviest emotional weight. For the veterans who had once walked Tehran's streets openly, who had trained SAVAK counterparts and shared late-night tea with generals, this was the culmination of 3 decades of transformation. From alliance to obsession, from human networks to digital shadows. The idea had crystallized in the mid-2000s. By 2002, Mossad's Iran desk had confirmed through human sources and satellite imagery that Iran's nuclear program was no longer a distant ambition. The exposure of Natanz and Iraq in August 2002 by an Iranian opposition group, with suspected Mossad facilitation, forced Tehran into partial transparency under IAEA scrutiny. Yet enrichment continued. Traditional sabotage, explosions, assassinations, carried escalating risks. Each scientist killed provoked stronger security, deeper bunkering, fiercer retaliation through proxies. A new domain was needed. Stuxnet, the worm that would become legendary, was born from necessity. Israeli cyber units, working with Unit 8200 alumni and private sector talent, crafted a weapon of exquisite precision. It targeted Siemens Step 7 programmable logic controllers, the exact model used at Natanz. The malware infiltrated through USB drives carried by unwitting contractors, then waited patiently, mapping the system, learning its rhythms. When conditions aligned, centrifuges spinning at full speed, pressure readings within narrow bands, it issued commands to override safety systems. Rotors accelerated wildly, then slammed to a halt. Valves opened and closed erratically. The physical destruction was gradual, insidious. Bearings wore out, cascades failed, thousands of machines ruined over months. Iran reported technical problems. The world slowly learned the truth. The first major impact came in late 2009. Iranian officials admitted to losing up to 1,000 centrifuges. By 2010, estimates reached 4,000, roughly a fifth of Natanz's capacity. For the Mossad team watching in real time, the moment was electric yet hollow. Success tasted of ashes, no blood on hands directly, but the human cost remained. Iranian engineers, some with families, labored under suspicion of sabotage. Purges followed. Careers ended. Paranoia gripped the program. One defector later described the atmosphere. "We feared our own shadows. Every glitch felt like treason." Parallel to the cyber campaign ran the kinetic shadow war. Between 2010 and 2012, 5 Iranian nuclear scientists were assassinated in meticulously planned operations. Masoud Ali Mohammadi, gunned down outside his Tehran home on January 12, 2010. Majid Shahriari, killed by a magnetic bomb attached to his car on November 29, 2010. Dariush Reza, shot by motorcyclists on July 23, 2011. Mossad Ali Mohammadi, bombed in his Peugeot 405 on January 11, 2012. The highest profile loss came on November 27, 2020, when Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, widely regarded as the father of Iran's nuclear weapons program, was ambushed on a rural road near Absard using a remote-controlled machine gun. Each strike required months of surveillance, local assets, and split-second execution. The agents involved, some Persian-speaking Israelis, others recruited Iranians, lived with constant dread. One compromised phone, one intercepted message, and the chain unraveled. The emotional toll on those who executed these missions was profound. Many had grown up hearing stories of the Shah-era alliance. Some had relatives who once lived freely in Tehran. Now they operated in the same city, under false identities, knowing that discovery meant torture in Ward 209 of Evin Prison or a public hanging. Families back in Israel waited in silence, forbidden from asking questions. One operative, after returning from a long deployment, described the duality. "You walk the same streets your grandfather once walked as a welcome guest. Now you're the ghost they hunt." The campaign slowed Iran's program, pushing timelines back years according to Western intelligence assessments, but never stopped it. Fordo, a deeply buried enrichment site revealed in 2009, became operational. New generations of centrifuges, IR-2M, IR-4, IR-6, appeared. After the 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, which Mossad vehemently opposed, Israeli intelligence continued covert collection. In January 2018, Mossad executed one of its most audacious operations, the theft of Iran's entire nuclear archive from a Tehran warehouse. Over 6 hours and 28 minutes on the night of January 31st, February 1st, a team broke in, cracked 40 safes, and exfiltrated 55,000 pages and 183 CDs, half a ton of documents. Loaded into getaway vehicles, the haul crossed back into Israel undetected. Prime Minister Netanyahu revealed the trove publicly on April 30, 2018, calling it proof of systematic deception. The archive's contents were devastating. Weaponization studies, warhead designs, test site plans, evidence that Iran had preserved know-how even after supposedly halting its military program in 2003. For Mossad, it was vindication and burden. The operation had succeeded because of lingering human networks. Old contacts, disillusioned insiders, people who remembered the Shah's era and distrusted the clerical regime. Yet each recruit carried risk. Each meeting in a neutral country or encrypted chat carried the possibility of exposure. Today, the shadow war continues. Cyber intrusions persist. Supply chain sabotage disrupts centrifuge production. Assassinations target key figures when intelligence permits. Iran responds through proxies, Hezbollah rockets, Hamas tunnels, Houthi drones, while accelerating enrichment to near weapons-grade levels. The Mossad network inside Iran, rebuilt from near nothing after 1979, now operates in layers of extreme caution. Compartmentalized, digital-first, human assets used sparingly and protected fiercely. For the men and women who serve in this longest of campaigns, the story is one of continuity through rupture. The friendships forged in the 1960s, the trust built under the Shah, the betrayals of 1979, all echo in the decisions of today. What began as Ben-Gurion's periphery dream ended in revolution, then transformed into an unrelenting vigil. Every operation carries the same unspoken question: how much further must we go to ensure survival? The answer remains the same as it was in 1950, as far as necessary. The network endures, not as allies in Tehran's palaces, but as unseen eyes in the digital dark, waiting, watching, ready.